you ready for an entertainment experience of a lifetime? Knockdown, drag-out, hard-hitting conversations, debates, and interviews. Well, if you said yes to any of these questions, sit back, relax, and enjoy something like no other. This is the Isolation Series podcast, presented by Wellbeingsperformance.com for all your online meeting needs, and by ImprintPilates.com Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier Pilates studio, also specializing in rehabilitation and athletic conditioning, and finally by greenstorage.ca Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. Here now is your host, Spencer Miller.
Hey guys, and welcome to this Thursday edition of the Isolation Series. Me, Spencer Miller, very pleased to be joined by my co-host with the most, who will talk way more than he did yesterday with James Duthie in the house. And of course, I'm talking about the bearded wonder himself, Paul Shields. And Paul, I'm going to switch things up on this Thursday to start off the podcast, and I'm going to throw it to you. We are both hockey fans. Over the last 48 hours, the beginning of the season started with the rest of the teams starting yesterday, including the Maple Leafs, who won 2-1 against the Montreal Canadiens. But out of the opening double dip days that were Tuesday and Wednesday, respectively, what do you want to talk about as far as the opening days of the NHL season?
Well, I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on, of course, the Toronto Maple Leafs and how they looked last night. I know that they are back-to-back tonight, so they're in Ottawa for Ottawa's season opener this evening. But I'd love to know your thoughts on your first impressions of the 2021 Toronto Maple Leafs.
First of all, it's hilarious to me just going through the opening lineup with the PA announcer as to how many GTHA players we have actually on the Maple Leafs now. Okay, which is, I think it has to be a record high for homegrown hockey players on that team specifically. Number two, Nick Boynton, I believe that's his name, is the first Toronto Maple Leaf to ever wear number 58. They said that during the broadcast. I thought that was intriguing because the Maple Leafs have been around for over 100 years, as we saw during the Centennial Classic just a few years ago. I was really impressed and continue to be really impressed with Nick Ritchie, because I thought when they got Nick Ritchie, like, what the hell were you doing? But through the preseason and through one game at least, Nick Ritchie seems to be fitting into Sheldon Keefe's system very nicely. And I know I am not going to ingratiate myself very well right now to the viewers and or listeners by saying this, but up until last night, I had zero clue that Manny Malhotra was one of our coaches on our coaching staff. I still think of Manny Malhotra as a 17-year NHL player, and then I saw him on the bench, which, by the way, he still looks like he could play, kind of like Jerome McGinley, but that's neither here nor there. So those are my impressions. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, Manny Malhotra's been there a while. I'm also going to correct you. Michael Bunting is wearing 50.
Well, why did I say Nick? Anyways, Michael Bunting. Sorry.
No problem. But yeah, I thought the slow start was concerning as always, but I think that this, Jack Campbell played great in the first period, and then the Leafs looked a whole lot more like the team I expected to see in the second and third. So I thought overall they handled the tie game and the 1-goal game better than I've seen them do in the past. And I was really impressed with David Kampf in the middle of the ice, and he took a lot of defensive zone faceoffs. The Leafs were basically 60%, just a little over 60% in the faceoff dot last night. And we didn't see a whole lot of that in last year's team. So for first impressions, I'm excited. I was excited to get the win. It's hard to criticize a win.
And special shout out has to go to Pierre Engvall. Pierre Engvall had a great preseason, and he scored a goal last night. But also, I thought that this was hilarious that Pierre Engvall also was almost responsible for giving up the tying goal with about 14 seconds left in regulation. And then Jack Campbell had to come up with a point-blank save. And you just saw Engvall at the end go up to Campbell with exhale and give him like a head tap, saying, "Thank you for bailing me out there, mofo. I really appreciate that."
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, it's all part of the game. It's all part of the team. And I think that if you were to ask him today, that's not a play that he'll make tonight against Ottawa. But yeah, the other thing I really would like to ask, and, speaking of Ottawa and, changing gears just a little bit, today, Brady Tkachuk was signed by Ottawa. It's a little more than $8 million per season for the next 7 years. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that contract.
I think that's absolutely fantastic because Ottawa has been doing some great things to rebuild their team and rebuild their nucleus. And a lot of pundits around the NHL this season, leading into the beginning of the year, have said, look out for Ottawa. They could surprise a lot of people and be one of the surprise entries into the playoffs this year. And I know that you're shaking your head because
no chance.
Like, absolutely not.
No chance.
But I think they're headed in the right direction. And
that I agree with. Yeah, I agree with you there.
And Brady Tkachuk is quite the player. He's not as good as Matthew by any stretch of the imagination in Calgary, but he holds his own, and I think that was a huge signing for them. Just like in Vancouver, it was important for them to re-sign Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Ottawa's moving in the right direction. I still think they have a long way to go in their defense and in their goaltending. Matt Murray has shown me nothing over the last couple seasons, particularly last year. I thought he was terrible. And to be fair, I guess he was hurt in and out of the lineup quite a bit. But for this team to compete in the playoffs or to make it to the playoffs, I think they need a little more firepower than they have. But I do agree that having Brady Tkachuk signed, this kid just feels like a leader. He feels like the next captain of this team to me. He feels like the type of player that as his energy increases, the energy of the team increases. If I were a Senators fan, and I'll sort of pose this question to you, does this give you even more reason to be annoyed with Eugene Melnyk?
Yes.
Because this owner, what took so long to get this done?
I know he's a marquee player in your market. You're rebuilding. He's still young. Just give it. It's not like you're giving him an Austin Matthews sized contract. $8 million in today's sporting landscape for whatever contract, for whatever sport that you want to look out of the four major sports: baseball, basketball, football, or hockey. $8 million seems like a pretty average contract.
Yeah, and I understand those who say $8 million is a chunk out of your salary cap in a game where a salary cap is so important and the cap's not moving. But I think this is the cost of doing business for somebody who is so important to your team. You weren't going to get him signed for any less than that. And I understand it's Pierre Dorian's job to try and get the best player at the best value. This just smells to me not of an issue between a player and a GM, but a GM and his owner who is notorious for not wanting to spend any money.
I'm sorry, Eugene Melnyk, you are one of the most maligned owners in all of sports right now. Kind of like the New York Islanders owner what was the name of the New York Islanders owner from a few years ago? Uh, uh, um, it was an Asian guy.
Yeah, it's. I want to say what came to mind was Charles Wong, but I don't know if
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah, that's correct.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
correct. Yeah, Charles Wong was Eugene Melnick before Eugene Melnick went full Eugene Melnick, if that makes any sense. Because Charles Wong did the exact same thing. But switching gears a little bit here, staying with Lou Lamoriello's New York Islanders, I just want to talk about this just for a minute because it was a little quirky and a little fun, in my opinion. And that is, how about something like 22 years later, Zdeno Chara goes back to where it all starts on the island. I remember watching him as a rookie with those teal and god awful New York Islanders jerseys from back in the day, and now he's circled back, and obviously it's like a Jaromir Jagr thing from a few years ago. You can't really expect much from Zdeno Chara at this point in his career, but I find it really fun and quirky that he went back to where it all started. That'd be like if Roberto Luongo, right before he retired with the Panthers, said, "Let me go back for 1 year to the Islanders as well," because the Islanders drafted him too.
Yeah, that's a string of Mike Milbury trades that don't look so good on the Islanders. Well, considering the fact that I still think they're paying Alexei Yashin. I can't remember if it was this year or next, but they've been paying that guy for a long time.
Yes, yep.
But yeah, like the Islanders and Hurricanes open their season tonight, and I think that's going to be two really good teams battling for position in that division. I will be interested to see how Zdeno Chara adapts to the new rules, particularly the cross-checking. Because for the last couple of years, it's been very evident that Chara doesn't skate the way that he once did and struggles to keep up with the game, and uses a lot of those, we'll call them veteran tactics, to control space around the net. And that cross-check being now, they're saying they're going to call it more, and they did throughout the preseason. I'll be very curious to see how that affects a player like Chara.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that I want to talk to you about is something that we talked about a couple of episodes ago as well, and that is the Washington Capitals opened their season last night, and Alexander Ovechkin picked up pretty much where he left off at the end of last season. He sniped 2 goals last night to put his grand total up to 732 for his career. So that puts him at 165 away from breaking Gretzky's all-time goal scoring record. Now, I know they say that records are meant to be broken and blah, 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 and all that stuff. This is one record that I don't want to see broken just because I like Gretzky, but I honestly think that if anybody can do it, especially showing what he did off the first game last night, I think 165 goals over the next 4 seasons, even for an aging Ovechkin, he'll get it done. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for Ovechkin, it's all going to depend on his health. But the guy it feels like he's built like a machine. He takes that knee-on-knee collision in their final preseason game. He's a game-time decision for their home opener last night, and he just steps up and scores 2 goals. Like, no big deal, no problem, right? So if Ovechkin can continue to play, the majority of the games each season and continue to stay healthy, I don't see a world where even an older Ovechkin doesn't score 30 goals, right? Like, the guy is just incredible. So I think he's got a great chance of getting there. And it wouldn't surprise me if even this year and next year he puts up 40 or 45, and then the goals per season number starts to shrink, right? And becomes a lot more attainable as he gets towards the end.
I can see him totally getting 48 to 52 this year.
Yeah.
And that takes your total immediately from 167 to start this season to 117 to 115, which is still a decent amount, but not for Ovechkin, in my opinion.
Yeah, and although he plays against some very good teams in the Metro Division, he's still going to be up against either some teams that have a lot of question marks or some teams that struggle with goaltending. Like I think about the Devils, I think about the Blue Jackets. You know, the Penguins have struggled in net over the last couple of years with Tristan Jarry. We saw the Rangers didn't play, like, you know, their goaltending wasn't great last night, excuse me. And then we have no idea what to expect out of Carter Hart and the Flyers. So even within his division, there's some teams that I think, even if the Capitals aren't winning a ton of games, that Ovechkin can still get a lot of goals. So I'm interested to see what happens, and I really do think he'll get there.
How did the Edmonton Oilers do in their home opener last night?
The Edmonton Oilers won in a shootout against the Vancouver Canucks. Pretty good game for the Oilers. Not a good goal by Mike Smith to tie the game to send it to overtime in the shootout. But other than a sort of brain cramp at the end of the game that cost them a goal, he played very well. And Zach Hyman scored in his debut with the Oilers. So, you know, a lot of things coming as advertised.
That still pained me to see that. Like, good for him.
So it's so funny you say that, Spencer. Sorry to cut you off, but I was texting with a friend just before we got on here, and he said the same thing about how he misses Zach Hyman. I want to make it very clear. I'm a fan of Zach Hyman. I think he's going to do really good things in Edmonton. I love the way he played for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But how Zach Hyman escapes criticism when he has been part of every single collapse on this Maple Leafs team is a very Toronto hockey fan mentality to me. Zach Hyman is a good hockey player. He works hard. He's got great work ethic. His skills have gotten better each and every year. But Zach Hyman has to work as hard as he does to be not as good as the best players in the game. He is an excellent complementary player.
Yeah.
Now, I like what the Leafs did in trying to bring some more depth, but how he escapes all of this, why he was the linchpin, why everyone is so mad he is gone is mind-boggling to me. I like Zach Hyman. I want him to do well. I don't care that he's not a Toronto Maple Leaf.
Here's a question. In your opinion, who's a better hockey player, Zach Hyman or Connor Brown?
Zach Hyman.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me.
Because Connor Brown had the same type of reaction when the Leafs let Connor Brown go, because Connor Brown was a hometown kid. And yeah, he wasn't great, but he worked hard. And so people gravitated towards him. So I felt, that a lot of the fan base felt very similarly. I didn't, but very similarly to the way that they feel about Zach Hyman in Edmonton. Now, would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I think Connor Brown, I think they're very similar players. I think Connor Brown is showing what he can do. He's growing into the player that he can be in Ottawa, and he always plays really hard against Toronto, and he's a nice hockey player. But I think this is a mentality. We have this mentality in Toronto where there's something about greatness that we dislike. We I think of Matt Sundin was the captain here for 13 years. The guy was incredible. They gave him nothing but plugs to play with the exception of an aging Alexander Mogilny and Darcy Tucker in his prime, who was great for the Maple Leafs.
Not to mention an aging Owen Nolan, who was great.
Yeah,
before he got to the Leafs.
Look down the list of the wingers that Sundin had. You know, people like Jason Blake and like Jonas. Jonas Hoagland. Like these third and fourth line players playing first line minutes.
Michael Renberg.
Yeah, Michael Renberg played well, but again, he was at the end of his career. He was a guy that was falling off at the time, right?
Who was the guy that I will never forget during the Philadelphia playoff game where he could have skated in a lot further, but he just decided to skate in like one step past the blue line and just shot straight at the goaltender, not even on the corner. It was like the easiest playoff save I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I forget who I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but I remember that play. But my point being, like, as Toronto fans, we disvalue greatness as if somehow these players don't work as hard as the Zach Hymans and Connor Browns, and there's a history of that. Like, we idolize people like Wendell Clark, and Wendell Clark is one of my favorite players of all time. but there's this overwhelming sense that, super talented players that play for the Maple Leafs don't care about winning for the Maple Leafs. And somehow Zach Hyman gets idolized because he has to work so hard. And the guy's a hard worker. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I just think that with the people that the Leafs brought in, give them more options and more depth. Not a single player of Richie, Bunting, Kasha, Kampf. None of those guys as a single player is better than Zach Hyman. But I think having those four players on your roster, it makes you a deeper team, right? So that's my thought. And so as far as Hyman goes, good for him. So glad he got the goal last night, but I'm not sad to see him not in a Leaf uniform.
Would you agree also then that like the Toronto market blows up players that should not necessarily be superstars per se? Again, I'm not taking anything away specifically from Matt Sundin, because Matt Sundin was great. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at somebody who is an elite legend in Doug Gilmour. Doug Gilmour was a elite legend for the time that he was here. Okay. But do you think it is a fair enough assessment to say that the Toronto fan base elevated Doug Gilmour's status more than it necessarily should have been? Because again, Doug Gilmour was a good player. Doug Gilmour, in my opinion, although he was a great captain and his leadership was great in 92 and 93, and that phantom high stick that went Gretzky's way that I still haven't gotten over. Thank you, Carrie
Fraser.
Carrie Fraser, yeah. But do you think that like Doug Gilmour was not at the level that the Toronto fan base may have elevated him to?
I think that Doug Gilmour from 91, when he came to the Leafs, to 95, he left the season after. So even 96, his time in Toronto, particularly the 91, 92, and 93 seasons, he was among the best players in the world. He was in the conversation with the Wayne Gretzky's and Joe Sakic's and Steve Yzerman's. He had that kind of effect, and his point totals would mirror that, right? Like his first season, he split between Calgary and Toronto, and I forget, but it was somewhere in the 85 to 95 point range. And then in 92, 93, and 93, 94, he had over 120 points in one season and over 110 in the other. And I forget which one's which, but like that is elite scoring. So I think that in Doug Gilmour's case, a lot of fans, and myself included, we think about those 2 years. We think about how great he was in those two seasons, and that's what we remember. And we probably, you're right. We probably put him a little higher than maybe he should be in the pantheon of hockey. But like, we're talking about a guy who won a Stanley Cup, who ended up with like 1,400 points or something in the NHL. He scored 450 goals. Like this is an elite player in the NHL. But I do think you're onto something. And I think that we often do that with players
because the argument can be made that the same thing happened with Wendell Clark. Again, I love Wendell Clark, not taking anything away from what Wendell Clark brought again to those 92, 93, and even after that, when he became the captain after Doug left initially. But I believe the reason that the Toronto fan base loved him as much as they did was not necessarily because of point totals, but more because they reminded the fan base, even though JYD was not a Raptor at the time and still wouldn't be for another 6-7 years. But my point is that Wendell Clark had a lot of JYD-ism in him in terms of being a fan favorite just because of his grittiness and willing to throw his fists and throw himself around the ice and different things like that. Is that an unfair assessment, or would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with in parts of that. I think the love affair with Wendell Clark for the Toronto Maple Leafs is he was the lone bright spot in some really, really terrible hockey teams through the 80s,
with
right?
with,
He was the one guy
with
who
Marcel Cousineau, my favorite
uh
name. My favorite name.
little later on in Cousineau was in the 90s, but yes,
Is
like you're right. There were just some terrible, terrible Maple Leaf teams. And he was sort of the lone bright spot. He was the one guy that, wanted to be a Maple Leaf, wanted to take the team. He was the team captain, and then he never asked to leave, right? He was traded for Sundin, which is part of the reason that I think some Maple Leaf fans never really got on the Sundin bandwagon. But I think you're right in the sense that like Wendell Clark was a good player. He scored whatever 300 plus goals in the NHL, which is not an easy thing to do, but it's also not like, is there any doubt in anyone's mind that Austin Matthews will score 300 goals in the NHL easily?
zero.
Right? Zero doubt. Someone like Phil Kessel, who was much maligned in Toronto. I'm fairly certain he already has 300 goals, but I'm going to check Uncle Google. Yeah. Phil Kessel is nearing 400 goals and has, almost 1,000 points in the NHL.
How old is Phil Kessel now, by the way? Just curious.
Kessel is 34. Yep. 34. So again, I think you're onto something as far as like Toronto is a white collar city with blue collar fans. So there's something about the hockey player, the basketball player that shows up, the baseball player that shows up every day, works their ass off and wants to be a Maple Leaf, wants to be a Raptor, wants to be a Blue Jay. And there's something when ultra talented players are ultra confident, there's something that rubs certain fans the wrong way. And it is a really interesting thing to like dissect.
But let me also put it to you this way, and put it to the viewers and listeners this way as well. To put a basketball lens on it for a minute, because the basketball season is less than a week away now from beginning as well. I believe that the same argument can be made when talking about Chris Bosh. Okay, Chris Bosh was a good basketball player. I believe that Chris Bosh's status got elevated more in Toronto because at the time it was right after Vince left, pretty much. I think he played maybe 2 seasons with Vince, if that, and then he ended up becoming the guy because, much like you talked about with Sundin, he didn't really have that many players around him to complement him at that time. So obviously, because of that, your numbers inherently increase and get higher and things like that. And then he ends up taking his talents down to South Beach and joining Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, 2 surefire Hall of Famers. And yes, they won NBA championships together, and nobody can take that away from him. And now he's a Hall of Famer. But I believe that he is a product of circumstance, and that is more the reason why he's in the NBA Hall of Fame as opposed to being an all-out great elite status NBA player.
I probably disagree a little bit on Chris Bosh. 2 championships. He was the third member of the big 3, right? Basically revolutionized the way that teams are built in the NBA now. He was a very versatile player in an era when there was still a lot of specialists playing. He could play in a lot of different spots on the court. I don't have the depth of knowledge in basketball that I do as in something like hockey, so I can't speak to, the specifics of that. And I wouldn't insult our fans who love basketball by trying to do so. But for me, Bosh always stood out amongst, even playing alongside LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. He had his role there and played it to perfection. I don't think that they win as many of those titles without Bosh on that team. So for me, I disagree a little bit there, but I understand the sentiment. I understand what you're saying for sure.
Okay. And last two things I want to cover today. First of all, it is the beginning of week 6 tonight in the National Football League. It pits an interesting Thursday night matchup, and that is second-year quarterback and the Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts, going up against the GOAT, Tom Brady, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This smells like a little bit of a trap to me in terms of the point spread line right now. As we do the show, the line is the Bucks by 8. I have a feeling that they are going to win by about 5. Uh, um, but I do think that Philly is on the up, much like we were talking about earlier about the Ottawa Senators. I like Jalen Hurts running that offense, and they got some good young pieces around them as well. Not to mention Pro Bowl tight end Zach Ertz, who's been there for about 7-8 seasons already as well.
Yeah, I'm not as high on Philadelphia as you are. The only interesting thing to me about this game is if the Bucks will cover. And it's funny because the line that I saw was 7, so to see that it's bumped up to 8 means that there's probably more than a few people that agree that 7 is going to be a relatively easy cover. The one thing, and I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but the one thing that really does hurt Tampa Bay and works in the Eagles' favor big time is a still no Rob Gronkowski, from what I understand. I don't know if you've seen any different, but as of earlier today,
as of right now, when we do the show, we're doing it just a few short hours before kickoff, and he is still out.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I saw as well. That is a release valve that Tom Brady has used to great effect for many, many seasons. So not having Gronkowski there changes the playbook a little for the Bucks. But I still think they'll win this game handily. And I would feel good about taking them to cover.
Right. The last thing I want to talk to you about is something kind of quirky and unique to end this Thursday edition. And I want to talk to you about vintage stuff for a moment, if I can.
All right.
And specifically vintage television. Okay. I know we had a Who's the Boss reference by me attempting to sing the part of the theme song during one of our episodes last week. God help us all, I know. But last night I downloaded on iTunes the original 1987 cartoon series of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Okay. And it's one of those situations, Paul, and I don't know if you agree with me, but it's so bad, it turns out to be amazing. Like, you know how bad it is when you watch it and you sit there and you think to yourself, how the hell did I ever find this entertaining as a youngster or in my younger days and things like that? But I still have so much fun watching stuff like that to this day, especially when you look, or not look, but when you listen to the cheesy greatness that is the theme song of a show like that. It is amazing. And special little nugget about that, the voice of Shredder, the villain in that original cartoon series, is the legendary James Avery, aka Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So every time you hear him yelling at the turtles, you also hear him yelling at Will in your head as well. So what are your thoughts on vintage shows like that? I know how much you enjoy, loud, shirts and shoes and different things like that. So I would assume that vintage cheese of cartoon nature is all up your alley as well.
Oh, for sure. And the Turtles is a show that I remember very fondly. One thing that always used to make me laugh about that show is when they would be like in disguise as like trying to get from place to place, and they would put on jackets, and usually they'd be depicted with like a vest, shoes, but no pants. And they'd still be wearing their like elbow pads and their fighting gear, which always made me laugh. But it's funny you say that. I went down a rabbit hole of watching the 90s X-Men, the animated series, not long ago, when I got Disney Plus and found it on there. There's something about the shows from growing up, and I put like Batman the animated series in that
that was
world.
amazing.
Yeah,
and I love Batman Beyond too as well. You know.
Yeah, Batman Beyond was a little later, but I enjoyed that as well. Or like the Spider-Man series from the mid 90s was very good. Yeah. There's like a love for those shows that I still have, and watching them today, it still makes me feel good. And you're right, they're pretty cheesy. That the Ninja Turtles in particular was very campy, but you sort of let all that go. Like you kind of your critique is so light.
Yeah, 100%, and I feel that way about some unbelievably horribly cheesy shows in general from that time. Like I look at some of the shows that I absolutely love from that era, and you got Boy Meets World, you got Family Matters, you got the original Full House and everything like that. And all of this, thankfully, now is available on either Netflix or Disney Plus alike. But you watch it back and you're like, man, this is so bad. But it brings you right back to that time when you originally watched it, when it was originally on TV, and you get those same feels when you watch it for the most part, and you're like, I can't stop watching this, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can get caught in a rabbit hole of old shows, even old clips. Like if I'm looking on YouTube sometimes, like particularly Fresh Prince, there's so many of those little moments in that show that I remember so fondly that it's easy to get trapped in those moments, and it's always enjoyable.
But you look at a reboot, for instance, as well, so many years later, of Mighty Ducks. Mighty Ducks was never a TV show. It was a movie series, very successfully, with Joshua Jackson and Kenan Thompson and Emilio Estevez, obviously. And now they have Mighty Ducks Game Changers that came out from Disney Plus with Lauren Graham in it from Gilmore Girls days. And again, every week when it came out, guess who was watching it? This guy right over here. And I didn't even give a shit.
Yeah, and there's something, I think during the pandemic, there was something comforting about nostalgia. I think a lot of people started rewatching shows that they enjoyed, rewatching movies that were their favorites, just for that sense of, feeling of something normal and something that kind of was expected, right? And I think that Hollywood and streaming services have done a really great job
encapsulating that.
Yeah, capturing those moments and really bringing that feeling back to people, and getting good writers that were fans of those shows or fans of those movies, and bringing an audience back that might have lapsed, right? So a big fan of that. I've watched a few episodes of that new Mighty Ducks. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, also special shout out to a cartoon show from back in that day as well that doesn't get enough notice, in my opinion, and that is Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck was another classic. Gotta love Darkwing Duck. And just to go off of your nostalgia thing of what you were just talking about as well, that's why I think a lot of people loved the 6-part or 8-part, I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 parts, documentary series, The Last Dance, that came out right at the beginning of the pandemic on Netflix, of the 1998 Bulls team and all of that behind the scenes footage. They did a great job of that. And even watching that with the NBA on NBC theme song, the da 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 da, and all of that stuff, like it brings you right back to it with Ahmad Rashad. And even back in the day, he had Inside Stuff. For those of you who remember NBA Inside Stuff, great show from back in the day as well. So many great classics, and nostalgia running wild, in the words of a man that you and I both used to like, but could give 2 craps about today, and that is Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, and just to loop it right back around and bring it back to hockey, how great is it to hear the ESPN hockey theme again with the NHL making its return to ESPN.
Yes.
Again, hits all those nostalgic notes. Really, really wonderful to hear. Tuesday night with the relaunch of NHL on ESPN.
Yeah, absolutely. Unbelievably great. And to be honest with you, I don't understand why ESPN hasn't brought back that theme song that was so iconic for basketball, at least for the playoffs, for like the Western Conference and Eastern Conference finals and the NBA finals, because I've talked to a legendary NBA broadcaster himself and friend of the show, Mike Breen, about it. And Mike Breen himself wants that NBA theme song back.
Oh, come on, Spence. You're a guy with a lot of pull. Make a couple of phone calls. Get that theme song back.
I'm good, but I'm not that good. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But this has been another great episode of the Isolation series. Always great to chew the fat with you, my friend Paul Shields. And we look forward to coming at you guys again tomorrow with another fantastic episode, not only to end the week, but to preview once again the remaining games of week 6 of the NFL season, and to see if I am right or in fact Paul is right about the covering for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Philadelphia Eagles in the Thursday night football contest today on the NFL Network and Fox. And we will see you all again, like I said, tomorrow. Thank you as always for watching and or listening. Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks once again for tuning in to today's episode of the Isolation series with me, Spencer Miller, and that guy right over there, Paul Shields. As always, today's show has been brought to you by wellbeingsperformance.com for all your virtual meeting and virtual meetings, period. Please go to wellbeingsperformance.com, as well as Barbarian Steakhouse, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's premier steakhouse facility since 1959. For more information, including any new updates on their menu, please go to barbarians.com, as well as imprintpilates.com, Toronto's premier Pilates studio, and greenstorage.ca, Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area's #1 self-storage facility. For more information, please go to greenstorage.ca. And Paul, please tell people all about some more whole grain goodness that is us.
Folks, be sure to check us out on podbean.com by going to theisolationseries.podbean.com. There you'll find the audio-only versions of the podcast, including all of our past amazing interviews. One more time, that's theisolationseries.podbean.com. And hey, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. It's at @TheSpencerMiller and at Pauly Shields, Pauly spelled Pawly. So find us on podbean.com, follow us on Instagram, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Special shout outs to our newest partner in crime on the Isolation series, and that is the Toronto Immune and Digestive Health Institute. For more information, please go to TIHDI.ca, and they can take care of all of your needs, from IVs to scopes and everything in between. Mark Silverberg and his team will treat you with spectacular respect and knowledge. That is the Toronto Immune Health and Digestive Institute.ca. You do not want to miss it. And once again, everybody, thank you for watching and or listening and supporting this thing we like to call the Isolation series. For Paul Shields, I am Spencer Miller, and we will see you again very, very soon.